we have a similar tradition that we've forgotten, which is the Purva Paksha tradition, where I could be a Vedantin and I'm going to study Buddhism. That doesn't mean I think it's the same. In fact, I'm making it different. I'm going to argue. I'm going to study it so that I can debate. And that doesn't mean I disrespect it, because I actually take it very seriously. Those are serious opponents. Or I'm a Buddhist and I'm going to debate the Vedantin, or I'm a Mimamsa, or I'm even within Vedanta, different schools. So the whole idea of sharpening who I am, my position as a Vedantin, was based on debating those who were not. So in fact, I looked at one of the training courses, one of the training methodologies for a Buddhist monk was, you do your meditation, you do your rituals, you study your tradition, and then you have to spend a certain number of hours every day in the debating court. And you have to be a member of the Hindu team, a Vedantin team, and while being a Buddhist, to learn how they would debate, how would they answer this question, and things of that sort. So this, I think that what Francis has demonstrated is a Christian Siddhanta view of the Hindu in a very authentic way. What would a Christian think of a Hindu? What are its qualities and so on? A Purva Paksha from the Christian point of view. And I feel that Hindus need the equivalent of the Jesuit college, which I just learned has 20,000 Jesuits in the world. Now imagine, we don't have, we have maybe 500 professors in JNU, and maybe all of Delhi University, if you looked at the humanities, would have maybe just a few thousand professors. Imagine there is no Shankaracharya, there is no, I mean, if you look at Chinmaya Mission, which is a large one, they have maybe 300 Swamis, 500 Swamis, something like that. Just imagine the staggering number of intellectual capital, scholars of highest quality, acharyas, theologians, who are exceedingly well educated, exceedingly well trained, who run dozens of colleges of their own all over the world, maybe a few hundred, I think in US 30 colleges, who have their own journals, who have their own television. So while we have produced super gurus in large numbers, we have not produced a kind of an academic setting with tens of thousands of acharyas being produced at the PhD level, and who spend like 35 years like he has spent, saying, look, I'm very proud Swaminarayan, or I'm a very proud whatever Sampradaya, and from my Sampradaya's point of view, I am an expert who can go and give a very, very detailed critique and very, very detailed analysis to this religion or that religion. In fact, I can give a discourse on Shiites to the Shiite people in such a way that they'll actually applaud me, because I've done such a good job. That is the mark of a good Purva Paksha. So I applaud that he has achieved, and the Jesuit college, which is almost 500 years old, has achieved that. Here is a tradition which is a very, very serious tradition. I mean, they have a lot of depth, a lot of learning, so we better have people who are qualified to talk to them. So at the time, they didn't have a whole lot of very highly esteemed, qualified, intellectual people who could represent Christianity in a very detailed philosophical sense. The Jesuit college was created for that. Now 500 years later, they have 20,000 people, out of which 4,500 are in India, Jesuits. So imagine, in India alone, 4,500 Jesuits, and I don't think Hindus have a fraction of that for intellectual horsepower available. So I think there's things we can learn how, and when you tell this to a lot of Hindus, when I mentioned this to one of the top Hindu organizations I won't name, how much time do you spend when you are training Swamis? How much of their time is spent in comparative religion? So he said, I don't care about others, I only care about what's in my heart. I know the truth. Why should I care about that? So I said, because have you forgotten Purva Paksha? So he was a bit impressed by that, but he hadn't thought of it, that we really need to do Purva Paksha. But then he started saying, oh, we teach them about Buddhism, and we teach them about Jainism, and we teach them about Mimamsa. So the Purva Paksha, other, in classical times, is not the relevant one today. In the classical times, when you learned Vedanta, you would, the other who was there at your doorstep was the Buddhist, that was the competitor, or the Jain, or the Mimamsa, or somebody else. So the Purva Paksha, other, today has to be the Western. the Marxist. We have to teach every Swami, every Pandit, everybody taught Hinduism should be doing Puru Paksha of Marxism, of Christianity, of Judaism, of postmodernism, of enlightenment, of Islam. Those are the Puru Paksha that are relevant today. And this is therefore not something alien to our tradition. This is how we traditionally learned. But we have forgotten that, and when you ask a Hindu today, he is very embarrassed. And he will say, I don't want to argue, I don't want to believe. Either he'll say that the study of the other is kind of like an insult to the other, which is not how it should be, because it's a respectful study of the other, as Professor truly demonstrated. That you can be yourself, the others is the other, and yet you can deal with them very seriously without disrespecting them. So our Hindus either they fall into the idea that studying the other will be kind of an insult to him and I'm doing something wrong by, I'm being rude by studying the other. Hindu leaders have told me that. Or they hide behind this thing that there is no difference, it's all the same, it's all either all Mithya or it's all atoms and molecules, it's all the same anyway. And they have this very naive, bumpkin kind of mindset of sameness, which means that I really don't have to work so hard to study what the other is all about because it's all the same. So the irony is that now we need to bring back Purva Paksha into Hinduism by learning it from how others have learned to do it. It's ironic that 500 years ago the balance of intellectual capital was very different. There was these formidable Brahmin traditions that the Portuguese and the others came and said, wow, we got the cannons and we can invade them and we can do all that, but they really got the intellectual horsepower and we better do something about it. So the Vatican said, okay, let's get going. And now, today, after 500 years, we don't have something like that, and the Christian traditions do. So I'm very glad that we can have this dialogue with Francis. US immigration laws recently have made it very difficult to bring Hindu Purohits and Pandits because the criteria of what constitutes clergy has been redefined to fit a Judeo-Christian or an Abrahamic notion of what constitutes clergy. This is a very problematic thing, and Umar Mysoriker, who runs one of the major temples in New York, has made a statement that in her estimate like 60 to 70% of temples may be shut down because we won't be able to bring people because this is a discriminatory clause. So there is obstacles that we have to deal with. There is huge resistance in changing textbooks, portrayal of Hinduism. Kamlesh ji is here, I know many people here are involved in fighting these battles. The textbooks, we have become aware of the problems which we were not aware of 10 years ago. We've become aware that these problems are very serious. We've started doing reviews of textbooks, portrayals, and the portrayals are absolutely horrendous. And then when you go to the authorities, you get the runaround, they're very polite, they're very diplomatic, they love you, you're very quaint, you're very exotic. But when you want concrete, tangible change, it is not very easy to get. So we have from diplomatic approaches in Virginia to litigation in California and various other things going on. So this is it's a simple matter that, you know, everybody loves us and the matter will be solved, because Irish were not allowed to enter white unions, because the white unions were Protestant, Anglo-controlled, and so the Irish were not allowed to join white unions. So this book, How the Irish Became White, is about how they were classified, after a lot of fighting, they got classified as white, so they could qualify to be in the white unions. This is a very big fight which went on for decades. Then there's also a book, How the Jews Became White Folks. The Jews were not white. And so it wasn't easy, it wasn't like everybody loved them and all that. So now Indians have to pay that price, we have to get organized. The Jews had a lot of funding, a lot of institutions they built, tough. And it was not like you come and America just welcomes you. So if you think that way, you're naive. You have to, Americans are extremely fair, and if you build a case, Americans are very open-minded. But you have to build a case. They won't just give it to you on a silver platter. You have to work for it. And you have to earn your place in the American tapestry as American Hindus who demand respect in the textbooks, who demand media should be fair. When they are talking about Hindu festival, they ought to understand what it is. I work with the Religion Newsletters Association which is based in New York. They have 20,000 journalists who are members, and they have courses and courses on how to write about sensitively about Islam, and how to write sensitively about this one, that one. And they are looking for Hindu groups to sponsor a course so that they can sensitize journalists around the country. And they have no such course, no history of such a course ever being taught about Hindus from a Hindu point of view. Now, Francis also said we should get articles in academic journals. I have tried, and I have got dozens of other people who have tried, but there are gatekeepers, there are agendas, there are institutional forces that will keep you out. For instance, an eminent person like Swami Dayananda Saraswati would not be considered academic by these journals. He would be considered sort of, maybe a knowledgeable guy, but from his own traditional point of view. But the academic, hermeneutics, language, deconstruction, theory, all of that that's required to be qualified, our typical Swami or Acharya would not be qualified in that, would not be considered. So the language used, the epistemology used, the worldview that is considered acceptable in the US and the Western Academy is based on a Judeo-Christian view of what constitutes religion and the language and the terminology into which things have to be mapped. Real obstacle is not Westerners, white people, or Christians or Jews, but a whole lot of Marxist Indians who control the gates of the South Asian studies. So it is not others, but it is a whole lot of self-alienated. And I'm not sure the Irish ever had a problem of self-alienated Irish. Certainly the blacks don't have a, blacks are very surprised when I tell them that, but blacks are saying that, why don't Indians just get organized and do what the blacks did and go fight with the dean and all that. A lot of blacks in Princeton University give me this advice. The point is, if Indians were to do what the blacks did, what the Irish did, the biggest, the people that they put up there to fight me would be a bunch of Indians they would get to do that. And so this is a very old colonial inferiority complex that we have in our culture that maybe others do not have. Chinese don't understand this, because when I was arguing on the Asian Commission about Indian representation and Indian portrayal, when they found out that the person who was arguing against me was an Indian, there was only one Indian who on the other side, and he was arguing like hell against me. None of the other people had any problem with what I was saying. The Chinese person could not understand. The black person just could not understand. The Jewish person just could not understand. So I would have often take my arguments, give it to this Jewish guy, give it to this very nice Chinese lady and say, you present it. And then this Indian guy would say, yeah. So then there is this man called Risley. Risley is appointed to be in charge of the census of India. That is how the caste system is created. Risley takes jatis, and he has a theory on jati, which said all the people in the world start out with different races, but then the races evolve into tribes, but then Europe and India evolve differently. The tribes of Europe evolve into nations, so they have systems of governance, they have justice, they have all that. Whereas the tribes of India evolved into castes, and they're stuck there. And for us to manage India, turn the caste into nation, this is what we have to do. So then he goes around constructing a map of all the court castes of India and forces them, using the census every 10 years, to fit into a hierarchy and decide who belongs where in the hierarchy. So previously, jatis which were very flexible, where they were not frozen or fixed, they now are frozen. And these censuses are held over 30 years, so they have more than 30 years, but during his time, 30 years. So it has a lasting impact on the social structure of India. So then there is this whole, how Dravidianism starts. There is a person, there is a guy called Caldwell, Bishop Caldwell. He's an evangelist, he's a Tamil expert, he spends much of his life in South India, and he begins to write the Dravidian linguistics for the first time. He said there is a linguistics which is non-Aryan language, and it is completely independent and separate. And therefore, if the linguistics of these people is separate, therefore they evolved separately. They were separate people, separate race, because they don't have any linguistic commonalities. So separate linguistics means separate race. And separate race means that he wants to construct a separate history for the Dravidian people, which he does. And then he takes two important ancient
Tamil texts. One is the Quran and the other is this Shaiva Siddhanta. They are two very famous ancient classical texts of Tamil. Sangam era, all the Tamils are very proud of that. He takes those and he interprets them to show that they are really non-Brahmin, non-Aryan, non-Hindu, and they are monotheistic, closer to Christianity. That's what he says. And that these evil Aryans and Brahmins came and imposed idol worship on them, but they never really had idol worship originally. This is based on his language analysis of these ancient texts. And then his successor is another guy who's also a bishop, also a preacher from Europe. His name is G.U. Pope. And they come up with this racial profiling of a very pure Dravidian race who are victims of Indians, the rest of the Indians, and these other Indians are sort of Aryan derivatives, impure Aryans. So impure Aryans, pure Aryans are Europe, impure Aryans come and they rule over the Dravidians. This is kind of the race theory that these guys make up. And Lord Risley turns Jati into caste, and that is what we currently have. Is the Lord Risley, India is a Lord Risley society. It is not a Manusmriti society, the way it has been frozen today. Now, the periods of Dravidian identity, it takes about 100 years to create these. First is, in the beginning, they demonize the Tamil people. They call them inferior. They say South Indians are vilified as immoral, ugly, and stupid. This is what Colville writes. Many, many times he writes this kind of stuff. Then he starts saying that South Indian mind is structurally distinct from the Sanskrit mind. Then he says the classic Tamil literature, the Sangam era, is glorious and not like the rest of the Indian literature. So he gives them a separate identity. And then he constructs something called pure Tamil religion, which he says Aryan Hindus colonized the Tamils to impose caste and immoral rituals, but there used to be, before that happened, a pure Tamil religion. And then he Christianized it. He says the Sangam era Tamil religion, he co-opts it as part of early Christianity. He begins to say that the dates of the Sangam era are after Christ, and actually it's the Thomas Christians, St. Thomas and all these guys came, and they brought these ideas into Tamil. So the original, he's telling the Tamil people, originally you were like Christians, and these Hindus have turned you into pagans and heathens. So he's trying to bring not only racial divide there, but also Christianity in there. Okay? And then they advise that Hindus and Aryans are the enemies, and the advice is that Sanskrit should be removed from Tamil culture, any traces of Sanskrit. So they are going and reclaiming, like Mahabalipuram is now renamed as the Tamil equivalent, and so on. So this is part of a movement started 150 years ago by these guys. Now British Indology goes through various stages, and the attitude keeps shifting. The whole ethnic makeup of Indians is a very serious matter for British Indologists to try and figure out. Who are these people? Now in the Bible, all of you heard of William Jones, and you think he's a very good friend of India because he said great things about Sanskrit. He did. He really loved Sanskrit. But when it comes to Indian people, he mapped, in Bible, after the flood, there are three sons and they go in three different directions. And there's Ham and Shem and Japheth, three sons. And they go, and there are three different races of humanity are created. And the Ham is given a curse called the curse of Ham, that you and your descendants will be black because you've done something evil. So black people are condemned as offspring of Ham in the Bible. This is very clearly established. So there's a whole debate on where are Indians. Are Indians son of this group or that group or that group? So we are framed into a category which is a European biblical kind of a category. And so with all due respects to William Jones and all the great things he did for Sanskrit or tried to, he was mapping Indians into a biblical framework. So that was part of his agenda. Because you have an empire, you have all those hundreds of millions of people, they are your subjects, but who are they? So if they don't fit in our framework, then we really don't have control over them. We need to have a framework which is comprehensive enough so that they belong somewhere in that framework, then we know enough about them. So a large part of the Indology project was to fit India somewhere in the scheme of things that Europeans had control over. So this it goes from Bibles to philology to history to culture to biology. After Darwin, there is a whole biological race theory, and Indians are made to fit into that. So the Indological study also shifts the location of Indians on a map that the Europeans have built about all the people in the world. And there are three camps. The Orientalists are people who feel that we can learn from Sanskrit good things. And we are Christians, but we should really study Sanskrit with the attitude of learning from Sanskrit. And Max Miller was in that camp, and William Jones was in that camp. Now, they never had political power. There were individuals who felt that way, and they too were doing this mapping, but they did not have political power or official power as such. The official power stayed with people called Anglicists, who felt that we ought to help Indians by Anglicizing them. And then there were two kinds of camps, those who felt that we should Christianize them, and those who felt that we should not Christianize them but Anglicize them. Now, I don't have time to go through all the institutions that the British created, but I'm going to have each of the major institutions of studying India, there's about 20 important ones in England and in India, which I'm profiling in detail what they studied and what they did. But I'll point out 2 or 3 points. One is, 1806, East India College is set up by Charles Grant, who was an evangelist, and its charter says very clearly that we want to inoculate young Englishmen against Indian culture with a heavy dose of English, we don't use the word Eurocentrism at the time, but English civilization superiority. And they don't use the word Hinduphobia, but they say, well, the evil of the heathens and the problem with the heathens and stuff like that, which is what we're now calling Hinduphobia. So they first want to inoculate the young Englishmen before they go to India with this kind of an ideology. So, because they don't want to take the risk of shipping them to India and finding out that they don't have their roots, they don't have their foundations, they may fall in love with India, they may get married there, they may have all these problems. So then we won't have them ruling India anymore. So they really give them this heavy dose in this college, and then they send them to India-based colleges to teach them local language and local customs so they can be very friendly and schmooze around and charm Indians and be able to manage them and deal with them. Then there is a Sarampur Seminary in Calcutta, which is still there. It's one of the evangelical intellectual hubs set up, and there's several of these set up at that time. And then I'm also pointing out there is a College of Fort Street, their main point is that they championed Dravidianism in Tamil Nadu. So they were the Indologists creating the whole Dravidian counterbalance to the, opposition to the Aryan identity which was being created. And they were using Tamil scholars in big time, for encouraging them, patronizing them to create this sense of Dravidian identity. Now, the Indology, British, a guy called James Mill, and he wrote 4-volume History of India that became the defining work on India for 100 years. And his son, John Stuart Mill, who was not a historian but a philosopher, who was one of the major philosophers of the Western civilization. John Stuart Mill is one of the big figures. And he's credited with ideas of democracy and liberalism and women's rights and workers' rights, one of those very liberal kind of guys. What they'll never tell you is that his entire life he worked for the British East India Company. He was a very important official whose job was to advise the British East India Company how to rule over Indians. So when he was asked how come this hypocrisy or this liberalism at home and colonialism over there, then he came up with a theory of liberalism which says stages of civilization. Civilization of stages. So, like child can't be given rights, but your parental duty is to raise him to be like you someday, so he will have rights. So we are a parental, more mature civilization, they are children, and so the reason we have to colonize is it's our duty, otherwise we will be remiss in our duty, so we have to raise those Indians like their children to be like us one day. So, and that is liberalism on a linear theory of civilization, the whole civilizing mission, it starts with that. So Hegel comes up with the anti-Indologist. He's kind of in the anti-Indology camp, but he's always studying India. He's always quoting ideas of India, about Indian culture and Indian civilization, having never visited India, having no access to Sanskrit, but relying upon James Mill's work. So one guy does something which is lots of fabrication and lots of completely horrifying things about India, and the other guy simply relies on it as gospel and comes up with more philosophies on different cultures and different civilizations. And that sort of a habit of using each other in a kind of a way is still there. That sort of goes on. And then Risley is the guy who turned all these theories into the caste system. One of the things I discovered is that there were a lot of good cops, people who were trying to do good in this era. One of the first things that my boss taught me when I came to America, I got my first job in the early 70s, was this American idea of good cops and bad cops. We were going to a meeting, and he said, I'll be good cop, you'll be bad cop. So I said, Gene, what does that mean? He says, well, I'm the boss, I have to run all these guys who like me, we all have, you have to, in other words, point out all those things about them. In other words, I have to do all the dirty work of criticizing them and telling them why they're behind schedule, they're over budget, and he has to sit back and say, oh, I've looked at this side and I've looked at that side, and these are the good cop, He's trying to help everybody. So I kind of learned how to play bad cop in the American sense. Then, in another career, we were sending delegations to Japan. I was leading delegations to Japan on behalf of ITT and China, and I was a good cop. So then I was told, corporate law, the legal department will be the bad cops. You are the good cop. In other words, ultimately after we've done a joint venture, I have to be living with them and working with them. So we have to have good relations. And so we bring them to New York and wine and dine them and take them to Broadway. They take us to Tokyo, they wine and dine us. So we have to have really good friendships. So I'm a good cop doing that. But we need very good, solid contract, and we need to really squeeze them and get the best out of them. That's the corporate lawyer's job. Because the deal is done, the lawyer gets out of the picture. We are the ones who are marrying them as marketing people and business people, so we have to be the good cops. So this idea of good cop, bad cop is a very common phrase in American culture. Now, in the Native American days, it was a very common ploy. It starts there. It was a very common ploy for an American to go out and fall in love, the romantic idea of Native Americans, they have great culture, and championing them, and campfires, and this John Wayne type character, frontier man who's out there living like the Indians, living with them, and so on. So often, the good cop would champion the rights of the Native Americans and argue against Andrew Jackson and other presidents who want to displace the Native Americans and take their land, actually champion on behalf of the Native Americans. And the Native Americans will begin to trust this guy, that he is there for us. We don't need to go represent ourselves because, he's there speaking for us in the Senate and so on. And the good cop would do his best to champion for these Native Americans against all the bad cops, yeah? But eventually, either they were together, the good cop, bad cop, really on the same side. It's just a game. Or the good cops meant well. They were honest people who meant well, but they would lose out. They would just eventually lose out. Yeah? So I took this corporate experience of good cop, bad cop, and then also there's a book I'm doing on American history of America from 1600 onward, where I'm profiling all good cop, bad cop as a way of framing historical events in dealing with other people. So I applied it to this era. There are a lot of good cops in this era. There is a theology called fulfillment theology. Fulfillment theology says, I love Hinduism. I love Vedas. I love it, but it is superseded by Christianity. So it's like saying you're in the kindergarten and you'll go up to a point, but you cannot go to the ultimate. You have to come to Christ for the ultimate. There's also something called inculturation, which has been practiced since the early Robert de Nobili and these kind of people came. Inculturation is like you have these computers which says Pentium inside. The Pentium is kind of hidden inside, but it's there. So this is called Bible inside. But outside, the church will be called ashram. They will be having puja to Jesus Devta, and the priest will be wearing saffron. And this is all over South India. It's very pervasive in South India. Huge pervasive in South India. And so this is called inculturation. The Vatican has argued for, against, both sides are arguing, those who want it, those who don't want it, but it is allowed. In other words, they keep saying, well, it's not the real thing, and those Christians who want to do it saying, yeah, but it's a good way to get in the door, You get in the door and you kind of schmooze them and get them in on your side, and then later on you can throw out the Hindu idols and deities and bring them to the true God. But in the beginning you have a kind of a mixture. And so a lot of our yoga teachers in this country have actually encouraged enculturation. They've sort of slipped into that and facilitated that unknowingly. Yeah? So those are good cops. And there is a whole movement called Christian yoga. My book has whole chapters on Christian yoga, Jewish yoga, Yahweh yoga, Kabbalah yoga, all kinds of yoga, where these are people who, after having studied Indian system, some of them for 10, 20, 30 years, some of them are teachers, and they have now decided that we have to reject that and find the same thing in our own culture, in our own language, and supply it to our people in our way. And they say that these are yucky idols, and these are heathen idols, and these are creepy mantras. These are some of the phrases in their advertising. That we protect you, we give you the benefits of yoga and meditation without the evil that may creep in if you don't get it through the Christian way. Then there is something called interfaith dialogue. I've had a lot of experience going to faith dialogue and saying, they always like to say, we like tolerance. You heard the word tolerance? Religious tolerance. Try the following experiment. When somebody says religious tolerance, say, well, why not say mutual respect? Now, they won't agree to that. You probably don't think that that will happen, but try it, it will happen. Because tolerance, I can tolerate somebody who is no good, who is useless, but it's a patronizing attitude. I can tolerate you. I think you're bogus. I don't believe in any of your stuff. It's all a bunch of baloney, but I tolerate you. It's like I'm very nice to you. But mutual respect means your path is legitimate. I can't say that because I have a commandment that false gods I can't allow. Because the moment he says mutual respect is acceptable, I'll say, okay, my murtis have to be acceptable because that's who I am. Female goddess has to be acceptable. Okay? Idea of reincarnation has to be acceptable. Because if you really believe in mutual respect, then you have to respect me for who I am, not who you would like me to be. Yeah? And I don't have to be like you to be respected. I am who I am is who I am. You have to respect me for that. So mutual respect is not available from most of the traditions, from most of the Abrahamic traditions. And I've learned this in many events I've gone where I'm the official Hindu speaker, and whenever they draft a resolution and whenever I see the word tolerance, I put my hand up and say, could we change it to mutual respect? And that starts a huge conversation. And I really have fun with that. Because I was the Hindu speaker in Canada, in Ottawa. They were doing the Holocaust Memorial Celebration. The Prime Minister was there, hundreds of people were there, and I stood up and I talked, and they had a resolution for tolerance, that all of us will sign. So I stood up and gave a whole talk that we should not be tolerance but mutual respect, give them the reason why it's different. There was a lot of college students and school students, they really applauded. They had a good time, they understood the point I was making. But my hosts and some of the people representing various religions were kind of sitting there and saying, you know, what have we gotten ourselves into? But, so that's a good cop. It's the good cop posture offering you tolerance, you have to say, is not good enough. Okay, just one more. And then the whole idea of human rights of Dalits and minorities, and that has to be done by attacking Hinduism, is also kind of a good cop strategy. I'll stop now because we won't have time, but thank you very much. Origins of liberalism are very interesting. There is this missionary Hinduphobia. It's filled with all kinds of strange things, and there is, you know, all kinds of claims of this happened and this violent happened. It's generally violence, oversexed people, abusive culture, they don't look after their children, they are grotesque, they are immoral, they are irrational, that kind of an image. And then there is James Mill's History of India, written in a very scholarly way by a man who never visited India, never had access to the original sources, but basically secondary information from various travel diaries and various missionary accounts and, you know, indirect accounts. He compiled the 4-volume History of India, which becomes the official reading material for anybody training to go and rule over India. That becomes the Bible for India. And then there is Hegel's Universal Teleology, which says that all civilizations evolve and we, the West, are at the front. And some people are further behind than others, but we are at the front, and our job is to pull them along. And there's that Native American, he actually had very racist things about Native Americans, saying that they had to die. and there's no problem. I mean, that was their fate. And blacks have to be turned into slaves because otherwise they're very dangerous. He had very racist things to say. Asians are very lucky. Asians are very lucky because they have the potential of being civilized, and we are here to do that. So there it is very good news. So this is a kind of a Hegelian theory of race. So I'll be happy to supply you with all the references of what Hegel said. These are not the most favorite things that in the colleges today they tell you about Hegel when they teach you as a great hero of thinking. Yeah, these are not the things that I talk about, but these things exist, and there are books about it. Blacks have written books, Native Americans have written books, Chinese have written books, and we Indians need to know about all this. Yeah? Okay. Then John Locke comes up with a theory of rights, which says that all human beings should have rights except those who are unfit to apply reason, because they shouldn't have rights. And people who are unfit to apply reason are like children, so until they are fit to have reason, our duty is to raise them. And then he comes up with an education standards which says that being like an Englishman is the ideal model of what an educated person ought to look like. So people have to be like him to be qualified to have reason and hence have rights. Yeah? So then John Stuart Mill comes up with a theory of progress and civilization based on John Locke's theory of rights, saying that just like individual children and individual adults have a relationship on who has rights, so also civilizations, some civilizations are children. So he classifies some civilizations are babies and some are like teenagers, and so we are mature, we are the adults, and we have to manage all these civilizations. So there's a whole theory of rights, very logically reasoned for thousands of pages and considered one of the great accomplishments of Western civilization.